Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sweeney Gray, and this is From the South, the daily news brief from Tell Us Your English, and we start this new edition right now. Thousands took to the streets in Peru to demand a recall of the pardon of former dictator Alberto Fujimori. They're also demanding the removal of the current president, Pablo Kuczynski, who's accused of trying to avoid impeachment by negotiating Fujimori's pardon. Students, human rights campaigners, and activists from various social movements have condemned President Kuczynski's decision to pardon the former leader on grounds of ill health. Fujimori was serving a 25-year prison sentence for corruption and crimes against humanity committed during his term in office from 1990 to 2000.
We are protesting against the illegal pardon that this government has given to Mr. Alberto Fujimori, a person sentenced for crimes against humanity. This illegal pardon has been given in exchange for voting to keep Mr. Kuczynski in government. Such a negotiation violates the rights and justice that we have fought for over so many years. We are people who have been victims of violations of rights during the Fujimori dictatorship.
Our correspondent Jaime Herrera filed this report.
In Lima, the national strike against Fujimori's pardon was massive. Workers, students, and political movements participated in the protest to demand the government invalidate Fujimori's release.
The pardon of Fujimori is illegal. It's not a humanitarian measure. It's a political move of Kuczynski and his cabinet, and it represents an immoral transaction. They are just negotiating to save themselves.
Demonstrators were showing solidarity with the tens of thousands of victims of Fujimori's dictatorships that were killed, forcibly disappeared, or forcibly sterilized between 1990 and 2000. The general claim was that with the release of the dictator, these crimes will remain in impunity.
This guy killed, extorted, bought the private mass media. I can't believe they've pardoned him. This is so wrong.
After he killed so many people and he stole 600 million, how come they are pardoning him if he is a corrupt man and a murderer?
Let them repress us all they want. Let them close every public square. Whatever they do, we, the people, will not abandon our struggle.
The other demand of the demonstrators was the removal of President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski. Representatives from the Frente Amplio package were highlighting that the corruption scandal in which Kuczynski is involved should continue to be investigated.
This is not a humanitarian pardon. It's just a political pardon that was negotiated and thus not legally acceptable. This is why international human rights organizations are pointing at this as a violation of international treaties. And that's also a reason to declare the permanent moral inability of a president.
The protest also took place in at least 16 regions of the country and in different cities across the world, where people have promised to stand in resistance until Fujimori goes back to prison for the crimes against humanity that he was already condemned for.
The victims of mass forced sterilization during Fujimori's dictatorship in Peru are still struggling for justice and compensation 2 decades on. Between 1996 and 2000, during Fujimori's regime, at least 300,000 people, mostly poor, indigenous, and female, were forcefully sterilized. At least 18 women are known to have died of complications arising from the procedure. Government health workers spent hours going from door to door to coax and bully women in a farming community in Peru's highlands to join the so-called free medical treatments. The government had denied all wrongdoing throughout until the victims themselves organized, taking their protests to the press and prompting an investigation and backlash.
I have a wound, a very deep one in my heart. Losing a child and at the same time feeling that someone made the decision for you to take away your right to be a mother, which is a natural right, that left a scar in me.
The Inter-American Court of Human Rights has called an extraordinary session to listen to the parties involved in the pardon granted to former Peruvian President Alberto Fujimori. Dr. Gloria Cano, director of one of the civilian organizations that represent the families of the victims of human rights crimes, said that the court has already declared that Fujimori's pardon doesn't have any fundamental legal standing and that they will demand an annulment. Former Peruvian presidential candidate Keiko Fujimori has appeared before prosecutors on December 28th to present testimony on his alleged ties to the Brazilian firm Odebrecht. Fujimori testified about the origins of funds used by his campaign in 2011 and 2016, based on an entry found on the cell phone of businessman Marcelo Odebrecht, mentioning Keiko's name. President Pedro Pablo Kaczynski has also testified on December 28th over his alleged links to Odebrecht. Here on Telesur, we've been traveling across Puerto Rico to see how people are coping after Hurricane Maria. In this report, we see how communities are organizing to solve their problems themselves.
We're traveling to the center of the island. Outside Utuado, Puerto Rico's third biggest municipality, we see how Maria swept away this huge bridge, leaving more than 20 families cut off. After days without help, the community set up their own camp. They call themselves the Forgotten Ones.
It's not just here. Many people have been forgotten in this country, and their needs are great.
Out of necessity, once the river had gone down, one neighbour invented a system to move across food, fuel, batteries, whatever they could. Federal aid has been patchy.
They brought some things. The army dropped food from a helicopter, but getting through is difficult.
So Jacqueline got food over to her father. It was a relief for now, but these are difficult times.
The river flooded the town everywhere. This is something that really shocks you. Something that is so sad and heavy. Here in Puerto Rico, we are humble people, good people. We help each other. We are united, working together. But it is not easy, but we can. Now, we continue to wait for the reconstruction of the bridge.
Over on the side of the forgotten community, one of the neighbours' own machines is working non-stop to open up the pathways. The fuel comes in the precarious supermarket trolley.
In the countryside, we don't know anything. We don't have electricity. We are totally isolated without any communication. Right now, if in 5 hours there is a new hurricane, we wouldn't know. We are saying that the crisis wasn't just because of the hurricane. It is because of the government. The supplies are not coming. This is what is happening.
They've been like this for more than 20 days, and what gets to them most is the uncertainty about their future.
And for electricity to be fully restored in Puerto Rico, the island needs 50,000 light poles, but the installation will not be completed for another 5 months. In the meantime, Boricuas are throwing their parties in the dark.
Puerto Rico will begin the new year the same as they began Christmas, in the dark, with a third of the island without electricity.
We still don't have electricity 3 months from the hurricane. We are running with an electric plant, with batteries, just Christmas ornaments on batteries.
It is the longest blackout in Puerto Rico's modern history, and authorities have assured that the island will recover electricity by the end of May.
My life has changed in a dramatic way, and nobody's helping us.
Local organisations say there is no way that 95% of households will recover drinking water services, as the emergency federal agency known as FEMA has announced. Even before the hurricane, 99.5% of the Puerto Rican population consumed contaminated water under the deception that it was safe. The lack of reliable information extended in other areas, for example, the number of deceased caused by the disaster.
We do not know how many people are dead. We think maybe 900. The official figures are 55, but in reality they have not been able to investigate completely. The economy is totally paralyzed. The tax collections from the government are on the floor. Therefore, they had to borrow 4.7 million from the federal government, money that we cannot pay because of the situation that we're in.
The Puerto Rican debt has gone up to $174 billion, counting all the losses by Hurricane Maria. But the help of the American government doesn't even reach 1% of that number. Puerto Ricans are American citizens. The United States is one of the richest countries in the world, but it is not helping to end the recession and the terrible condition on the island. This is causing thousands of Puerto Ricans to flee their own country. In the last 2 months alone, there has been an exodus of more than 200,000 people to Florida.
And we have more news in a minute, so please stay with us. Welcome back. The doctor strike in Bolivia continues amid a political standoff with the government. Our correspondent Freddy Morales tells us more.
El gobierno del presidente Evo Morales y los gremios médicos.
It is still uncertain if dialogue between Evo Morales' government and the doctors' union to resolve the strike that's been going for 40 days will happen. The strike started on November 23rd because of an article in the new penal code that the doctors say criminalizes their profession. Several talks with the ministry have failed, so now the doctors want to talk to President Evo Morales. The government has complied, but with the condition that the strike must end, something that the doctors have not agreed to. The doctors want to join workers' union that has announced protests in January to demand not only that the article be made void, but also 700 older articles on the penal code that they say criminalizes protest. The government assures that the strike has caused 8,000 suspended surgeries, caused a backlog of 38,000 doctors' appointments, and 800,000 patients are without access to healthcare.
We thank Freddy Morales for that report. In 2017, Colombia saw the historic ceasefire and peace agreement after decades of war with the FARC rebels deep in the jungle. But the true challenge was getting officials to comply with all parts of the deal. We have a full report on this extraordinary challenge for you now.
In 2016, Colombians couldn't believe their eyes. After more than 50 years of war, peace was on the horizon. The FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, and the government finally signed a truce with a pen made with a bullet, symbolizing the handing over of arms by the former guerrilla. Both sides ended a war that had torn apart a country and whole generations. The leader of the former rebels, Timochenko, spoke of the hopes of achieving a definitive peace in Colombia.
Goodbye to weapons. Goodbye to war. Welcome, peace.
The civil war in Colombia was the longest-lasting armed conflict on the continent. Since 2012, both sides negotiated in Cuba how to end a war that had left more than 200,000 people dead, 5 million displaced, 80,000 disappeared, and 30,000 kidnapped. After all the handshakes and the photos, 1 year into the implementation of the agreement, there is still a lot to do to achieve true peace.
Los alzados entregaron sus armas.
The rebels gave up their weapons in exchange for being a political movement. Not in 20 years' time. They want it now, just like the M19 in Northern Ireland, in El Salvador, in Guatemala, in South Africa, and in every conflict that has been resolved in a negotiation table.
Los conflictos que se han resuelto en una mesa de negociación.
The deal promises peace and seeks justice for the victims through reconciliation and justice for crimes committed on both sides. Now the FARC are transitioning into civilian life and preparing to take part in peaceful politics. But despite this, the former rebels denounced the government of Juan Manuel Santos for not fulfilling all of the agreement. More urgently, since the signing, over 150 social leaders have been killed in Colombia, including FARC members and their relatives. State officials involved in war crimes could face impunity after last-minute changes to the deal. And on top of that, the threat of paramilitarism is still constant for campesino communities. A deadly attack in the Tumaco region in October is a glaring example which continues to cause uproar in the country. Campesinos blame the anti-riot police SMAT for killing at least 10 people who were protesting against the government. They were against the forced coca substitution program, which was not part of the peace agreement.
The state has always treated us in a disproportionate way, in a repressive way. They treat us like we're at war, a military treatment, like the indigenous people of Colombia were armed groups, and they have to be defensive towards us.
But the process does have its positive outcomes, which could spark some hope among those who feared the deal was failing. After years of fighting in the jungles of Colombia, the FARC agreed on a ceasefire and handed over all their weapons. The UN counted more than 7,000 weapons for the same number of combatants, a historic figure for any peace deal in the world. They demobilized and later moved to the transition zones, where they created their own cooperatives, and now want to form their own soccer team. But their biggest dream was to become a political party. While keeping their acronym, they became the Alternative Revolutionary Force of the Commons.
We don't hesitate to extend our hands in sign of forgiveness and reconciliation. We want a Colombia without hate.
Still, there were political figures that fought against a peaceful future, like former President Álvaro Uribe, who was the key promoter of the campaign against the Havana Accords. Uribe, who has been linked to the paramilitaries, tried to convince Colombians that the peace deal would give full immunity to the FARC members.
Think that if this was done with the FARC, what will the country become then? What will it do with its dissidents? What will it do with the ELN? What will it do with the 3,500 criminal gangs, with 170,000 hectares of drug trafficking?
But the Senate had a mandate to ensure that the deal would be consolidated and shield from future changes. The legislative branch approved in 2017 the special jurisdiction for peace, the backbone of the agreement. But many steps remain to complete the deal agreed upon.
There are many projects that the Congress hasn't dealt with yet. They've delayed them. Those projects are essential to guarantee the right of the victims, to promote development and strengthen our democracy.
This process has become an example for the country's second guerrilla to begin its own negotiations for another historic peace deal. The ELN National Liberation Army began talks in 2017 in Quito, in which Ecuador acts as a mediator. They also agreed to a ceasefire, but have denounced that the paramilitaries have seized the opportunity to kill their members.
In
this aspect, facts speak louder than words. We have an ELN delegation that has a mandate to not leave the table until we have a deal, and we will fulfill it.
In a process full of ups and downs, Colombians and the region still hope a definitive peace can be achieved, so that the future generations won't even know the meaning of the word war.
Also in Colombia, a massacre is currently taking place in the health system. An extraordinary number of people are dying because of bad cosmetic surgery performed by unqualified doctors who are operating with licenses from the Ministry of Health.
According to Congressman Jorge Ivan Ospina, in Colombia there are about 300,000 aesthetic surgeries each year, and a lot of them are performed by non-qualified doctors in poor facility conditions in what are called garage clinics.
Colombia is the second country in Latin America where a great amount of cosmetic procedures are carried out. But this high demand is funneled to unethical people who, without having the proper education and without being specialists, dare to do this kind of surgery.
Many of the doctors or surgeons that practice these kinds of procedures make short-term courses abroad that are approved by the Ministry of Education, but the training is not sufficient to perform the surgical procedures. According to forensic medical experts, in the last 2 years, 51 people, in particular women, have died of complications related to poor surgeries.
The majority of people are drawn in by false promises of successive surgical treatment and go to these facilities for simple surgeries on the glutes or mammary glands.
For this reason, Senator Ospina has put forward a law to Congress to regulate these kinds of procedures, but without any successes so far, due to the business interest that exists behind the surgeries.
There is a large lobby of doctors who take advantage of the demand for this type of procedures. You can also find doctors with abilities and with 10 or 15 years of experience, but also with newly graduate doctors with short-term courses at foreign universities that want to do this type of surgeries, and this will limit their capacity because they are not trained for it.
Cali, Medellin and Antioquia are home to most cosmetic surgeries in Colombia, cities where the package for foreigners includes the surgery and tourist walks.
Javier Jimenez Pavao, considered one of the largest drug traffickers in South America, has been handed over to the federal police of Brazil upon extradition from Paraguay. Pavao, known in his home country of Brazil as the drug baron, served 8 years in jail in Paraguay for money laundering, violating the gun control law, tax violations, and for running a criminal organization. He awaits an 18-year sentence in Brazil for similar charges. And since Michel Temer became president of Brazil via a coup that ousted Dilma Rousseff, which represents a breakdown of the Brazilian democracy, he has implemented a series of neoliberal policies that have removed basic rights historically enjoyed by Brazilian workers. Join us for the first in a series of reports looking at the Temer era.
Since December 2016, Brazil lives under a hard fiscal adjustment, a constitutional amendment proposed by Temer that frees all public investment for 20 years. For everything, there is a limit of expenses, except for the payment of public debt, that consumes almost 50% of the national GDP.
It has nothing to do with the increase of the economy, because the government is taking money out of the economy, education, health, public investments, out of big projects. To put it where? To put money in the debt payments.
The impact of the cut is visible in all social areas. In health, for example, experts point out that in 20 years, the sector will lose more than $220 billion, a reality that affects the 190 million patients that depend on the health system, more than 90% of the population of the country.
I was at the hospital for minutes, and what they show on TV, it really is the truth. The situation is really hard. There are people on the hall, on the floor.
We know that we have very good professionals, but it is difficult to do a good job because of this situation.
This was also the experience of 20-year-old Michelle. She's a student of pedagogy at the Federal Fluminense University, an institution that didn't have electricity in December because the education minister didn't have sufficient resources.
Education is a right. It is not something that must be a privilege only for those who can pay for it. It's a right that we need to fight for.
The constitutional amendment that freezes public expenses for 20 years is one of the largest attacks on the basic rights of the workers. Despite having been approved by a conservative Congress, Brazilians expect that with the return of the left wing, there will be a referendum to revoke these and other measures by Michel Temer's government.
Food shortages in Venezuela as a result of the economic blockade and speculation have become a part of daily life. However, communities are taking action and building initiatives to deal with these shortages of basic goods. A community-run bakery in a small neighborhood in Caracas is just one of those community-led solutions to deal with the problem. Freddie Gillingham has more.
Tucked up on the third floor of an apartment building in the Casica Tayuna community of western Caracas, Oswaldo Perez is preparing bread for some 200 families. He's up at 6 a.m. every morning and makes up to 300 loaves of bread a day from his self-made bakery. But the running of this initiative goes further than these four walls. It's the community who oversee the preparation and distribution of this bread.
The
The bread has been a great help to the people. We bring the bread to the people. We work with the people on the barrio, on the mountains, in the communities, by bringing it to their houses. They don't have to do these large lines like in the commercial stores, or fight for it.
This community in this Bolivarian housing mission complex have taken on the responsibility of autonomous food production and distribution. Each month the community receive 83 sacks of flour. In the face of food shortages, bread is a necessity that must be managed.
The people feel drowned because of the shortage of the food. The blockade doesn't allow food to come. You know that most of the supplies are imported, and we cannot get it because of the blockade. We are eating what we can find. It is hard because of the blockade, which has made food very expensive.
As well as dealing with shortages, Perez and his community must also watch out for contraband hoarders, who get hold of basic goods and sell them at a much higher price. Therefore, the community makes sure the procedure of distribution is kept tight. Organisation is key. A huge amount of Venezuela's domestic produce is being smuggled abroad. As a result, communities are taking on initiatives like this one, keeping Perez, his family and his neighbours fed, just in time for the most important meal of the day, breakfast.
And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Welcome back. 12 people have been killed in an attack on a church in Cairo. Among the dead are 3 policemen who were on duty at the church. Several people are believed to be injured. The armed attacker tried to enter the Imam Mina church in the Helwan city on the outskirts of Cairo. It is not clear how many attackers were involved, but the authorities claimed at least 1 person has been shot dead by security forces. And now let's take a look at some of the other stories from around the world.
An outbreak of the highly contagious disease diphtheria, mainly affecting children, has worsened the situation of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. The airborne disease has already killed 27 people, and up to 160 new cases are being reported in the refugee camps every day, where more than 600,000 Rohingyas are taking shelter. A team of British doctors, nurses and firefighters have arrived to provide medical aid.
The ones who tend to suffer the most is the children, because the children so far, the majority of the cases tend to be from the age of 4 to 15. So that's going to be the challenge overall, is dealing with them, looking after children in very limited resource environments. So that is going to be exceptionally challenging.
At least 14 people were killed in India's commercial capital, Mumbai, after a fire broke out at a rooftop restaurant early Friday. 11 of the 14 victims were female and the remaining 3 were males. The fire started at around midnight at the 5th floor of the restaurant. In another deadly fire in an apartment in New York City, at least 12 people have been killed and 4 others critically injured. The fire is considered to be the deadliest in the city for at least 25 years. The victims include a 1-year-old child. The cause of the fire is not yet clear. More than 160 firefighters helped bring the blaze under control. President Donald Trump has tweeted that the eastern United States, which has been hit with freezing temperatures, could use some good old global warming. Trump dismissed climate change as a Chinese hoax to harm the US economy, and in June he also pulled out of the Paris Agreement.
Dozens of protesters have gathered outside Nazareth to denounce a visit to the area by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, where he is to sign a development agreement. Protesters of mostly Palestinian descent marched through the village of En Mahil reading behind a banner saying, "In En Mahil, we don't respect racists." They also called for a boycott of the entire ceremony because of Netanyahu's personal and political anti-Arabic stance. Women and children have participated in a self-defense training camp organized by authorities in New Delhi, which has a reputation for poor security standards for women's safety. especially as it relates to sexual assault. Around 2,500 women have registered for the Winter Self-Defense Training Camp held annually for the last 4 years and organized by India's Special Police Unit for Women and Children. In China, the animals at the Qingdao Forest Wildlife Zoo are kept in comfortable temperatures year-round thanks to the zoo's sophisticated heating system. The zoo provides different heating equipment to make sure that the animals can live comfortably and enjoy a warm winter, since most of the animals living in the zoo in East China's Shandong province come from Africa. The temperature in their living environment has to be above 20 degrees Celsius.
Such as the air conditioner for giraffes, we provide an underfloor heating system for the newly introduced meerkats, because they will burrow into the ground. We have adopted the most advanced air conditioning system in the hippo pavilion, so it's neither too cold in winter nor too hot in summer.
The 4 baby lions were born 7 days ago, and I feed them milk every 3.5 hours. The 3 baby tigers were born at 2 different times. One is 26 days old, and the other 2 are 17 days old. I feed them milk every 4 hours.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, tellusyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I am Soyini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.